Good morning again. Let's start with a prayer. We pray for all who are in isolation today and everyone who is at school today, and not just at our school. We pray for HTA, the Comp, JP2, St. Francis of Assisi, where my kids and wife are, and all the schools throughout the world. We pray that God protects teachers and students with a blanket of guardian angels, and that we all do our job and disinfect desks and hands and everything else we need to do. Okay, so we're on page 6 in the handout. And it says there's 7 ways, probably more than 7, in which a relationship can be represented. And those 7 ways are the dots, everything from table of values to equations to maps to graphs. And they are actually, you can see them right here. You don't need to turn to this page. You do not have this page. But you can see that the point 20 to 10 is the same thing as this point, 2010. And they're just represented differently, one in the table, one as an ordered pair. You can see in this mapping diagram, 20 goes to 10. And in this graph, you go 20 to the right and 10 up, and it's the same point. There's another couple. If you were to sub 20 into the equation, you would get c equals 10. And that's what they mean by different ways of expressing a relationship. And you actually will be seeing these different ways as soon as our next concept here. So in the box, it says, it talks about dependent variable and independent variable. It gives you an example, y equals 3x subtract 5, which is a line. And it tells you that y is dependent and x is independent, and you have to know that. So y is dependent on x because x, you're always given an equation with x, and you can't calculate y until you know x. So that's why y is dependent on x. If you want to think about a baby being dependent on its mom, and baby ends with y, that might be one way to remember that. Hopefully understand it, but that's the first time I ever said that, and if it helps anyone remember that, I'll be happy. Independent variable is your x, because you're always given in the table of values x equals 3, x equals -2, x equals 0, and then you plug that in to find y. And everyone usually gets the inputs and outputs, so another way of remembering that x is the independent variable is that the independent variable equals the inputs, the numbers that you put in. Again, the x on the table of values, those are the inputs, and you plug them into the equation and you get your outputs. Just moving up here a little bit. So the other thing is x means the domain. Oh, it should be reversed. Sorry, on my notes I usually put the x first in alphabetical order, but they didn't in the workbook. So go ahead and put domain here. Oh, I apologize. And range here. And we'll cross that off. The other thing we can do on the bottom of the page is just put an ordered pair, 7, 11. As you know, x goes before y. And is x the independent or the dependent? That's what you have to remember. It's the input, the independent. Y is dependent on y. Let's just write that down, and we'll have to go on for the next few questions and our homework questions. All right, flippage, next page. Let's do example 2 together. Just the first one, A. It says independent, dependent, inputs, outputs. And so this is what they mean. First of all, you need to understand that independent variable and dependent variable are going to be a letter. Okay, so if you put 2, 4, 6, 8 for your dependent variable, that's wrong. Your dependent variable has to be a letter. And so if you look at A, your variables are going to be P and Q. And those are the only letters that you have. So number one, the independent variable is going to be one of these, and you have to know that P and Q are just like X and Y. Okay, so your independent variable is P. Your dependent variable is the Y, which is Q. The input, usually you can do a squiggly bracket, so do your best squiggly bracket, are the values of P. So 5, 8, and 11. And similarly, your output is, go ahead and do the output. And you should have put 10 and 16. And usually those are in numerical order. No worries on this question, but if you have numbers that are not in numerical order, put them in numerical order, please. Go ahead and do B, and we'll correct it in a couple minutes. It's helpful to put X and Y. Now you have to know, is X the independent or the dependent? And don't guess. You don't want 50% on these questions. Okay, independent variable. Now that is X, but you can't put X because there's no X on this question. So don't put X and Y if you're going to be tempted to put X there. So X is the V, capital V, which means the dependent variable is Y, which is capital A. And like I said, everyone gets the inputs right. So you just put 4, 10, and 25. Now, what I didn't tell you on the outputs is if there's a number that repeats, you do not need to write it twice because you've already written it once. So that is part of the output. So we already know that 15 is part of the output. We don't need to write down 15 again. Okay, and put them in numerical order, please. Great job. Okay, another couple minutes to do C. Actually, I'll go down to 66 seconds to do C. Okay, independent. So independent X or Y, it's X. So capital B. Dependent, make sure you put small c, although it's kind of hard to tell the difference between big and small c. So small c. And the input, here are all the x's. There's an X, there's an X, there's an X, there's an X, as all of ordered pairs are X first, Y is a second coordinate. So the input, 3, 4, 5, 6. Again, if they're not in order, put them in order, and if one repeats, just write it once. And the output is 7, 11, 15, and 19. And there you go. Good job. Go ahead and try your best. Example 3. I will give you a couple minutes to try to figure those ones out. Good luck. Please pause. Okay, so which one is X and which one is Y? Well, we're always given equations like y equals 3x plus 5 or y equals x subtract 2. So anytime you have a something equals, that's the y. Okay, so any letter is by itself, we're going to call that y. So if you have t equals something or d equals vt, d is the y, d is the dependent variable. Okay, so it says independent first. And remember, it has to be a letter. It can't, that too has nothing to do with our independent and dependent variables. Variable means letter. So our independent is the x. Which one is the x? And you have to see the number pi as a number. 3.141529, blah, blah, blah. So pi is not a variable. It is a number. So independent variable means x. That's the r. Don't put 2 pi r. Don't put pi r. It has to be r. And dependent variable, the y, is your c. If you didn't get that, who cares? But study star that one. And study star this one, because we haven't done one like this either. This is your x. This is your y. Okay, so now you know how to do graphs. Your independent variable is your x. Don't put x, put t. And your dependent variable is the other one, h. And in C, it says S is dependent. So that's going to be good enough for me. Dependent variable is S. Independent is the other one. P marks the spot. Cha. Okay, you have 10 minutes to do your homework. First thing I want to tell you right now is, opposed to you pulling your hair out, this fill in the blank, this is the relationship between two quantities called a relation. It's kind of silly, but that's what that word is. So now you can do the rest, and I will be at Google Meet if you want some help. Good luck, and you have 10 minutes. Please pause the podcast. Okay, good job. That homework is due tomorrow, whatever you didn't get done. And let's move on to page 8, where we're going to graph a line or a parabola using a linear equation or a quadratic equation. Fancy words. Linear just means line. Quadratic just means parabola. If you don't know what a parabola is, that's this and this. Smiley face, frowny face. Horseshoe, upside down horseshoe. So first thing I want to do is, again, just reinforce that x. You see x, I'm giving I've been given all the values for x, so x is independent. X here, x equals 2 and x equals 0. But y we calculate, so it's dependent on x, and to sub into this equation, and that's how we get y. So let's do the first one together. We're going to use this formula. You don't have to write it down every time, but I'm going to write it down once. We're going to write down 2x subtract 5. I will always give you that. It's also important to know that this is a line. So if we get a Harry Potter lightning bolt, that means we did the negatives wrong. And we're going to do the negatives first. We're always going to put negatives in the brackets. Put negatives in brackets. Of course, you're writing this down, please. And that's going to, well, save you a lot of marks, because if you give me a lightning bolt, it's not going to be worth much. Parabolas, again, you should get something like this when you have an x squared, not that. That's wrong. You know it's wrong. Look at your negative signs. You got to put them in brackets. Okay, I just wrote down over there. That's no good. Wonder if this gets rid of everything or just. Okay, come on. There you go. Oh, it's going to delete everything. Oh well. So we got y equals 2x subtract 5, and wherever we see an x, we put in -2. So I asked you to put the negatives in brackets, and it's going to be very important when we have squared exponents. But in this case, we just sub it in for x, and then we calculate this on our calculator or in our head. -4 subtract 5 is equal to -9. That gives me the ordered pair, -2, -9. I'll give you 1 minute to do the next one. And same equation, so now we substitute -1 in for x and calculate. You get -7. That's the point. -1, -7. So go ahead and finish those 3 points, and then I want you to go to the next page and graph them on the grid. Okay, pause this, please. And go ahead and follow B, which I just told you to do, and C, connect the dots and draw arrows at both ends. Okay, so here are the answers. Hopefully you got these values on your table. Don't worry about these ones. I'm just going to give you the numbers that I want you to do. You're not going to have to create your own numbers. No, having said that, I think there's a couple where you're going to use 2 negative numbers and 2 positive numbers, but I would give you none of them. So that's coming up much later. But if I give you numbers, don't worry. If I leave you blanks, it's just for you to, if you make a mistake, to do that one over. And when you plot these, this is a line. Okay, so y equals 2x subtract 5 equals a line. And whenever we have y equals, we have y equals 2x subtract 7, there's a line. We have y equals 2x plus 3, there's a line. Whenever we have y equals negative 5x, we'll be learning how to use your graphing calculator even more during the next 2 units. There's a line. Okay, so anything we have y equals 3x plus a number or no number, that gives us a line. And again, we should know that so that if we get a lightning bolt, you know that the negative numbers, you did them wrong. Okay, so it's either a line or a parabola in grade 10. That's the graphing for me, lines or parabolas. Okay, I just shut my email off, so there should be no more little bubbles coming up. Plot the points. You do need the arrows, so write down arrows if you want full marks on my graphs. And you also need to label it, which they tell you you don't have to. This line needs a name. What would we name this line? And the answer is the equation. So we have to write down at one of the ends of the lines, y equals 2x subtract 5 for full marks for me. Okay, and it's going to be very helpful when we go to solving equations and we have 2 lines. We need to know which line is which, not just draw 2 lines. Okay, so this line is y equals 2x subtract 5. Get into the habit of labeling your lines for full marks. Please write that down. Now we've seen use the graph equations before. So it says x equals 6. You have to know where x is. There's your x. So I'm going to go right here. Where x equals 6. Go straight up until I hit the graph, and then go straight sideways on the other axes. And you can say, see, that means y equals 7. And if you plug that in the equation, you also get the same thing. 6, 7. Of course, that's the ordered point. X equals 6, y equals 7. And I said I'm not going to ask you F. However, you do need to know G. Sorry, not G, yes. And I was talking about H. Okay, so H, fill that in. This is a linear relationship. So when you get lines, it's like y equals 3x subtract 7, or y equals negative x, or y equals 5x plus 10. Those are all lines. So know what you're graphing before. That's going to be helpful so that you know what your graph should look like when you're done. G, use the graph again. When y equals 3, so you go to your y, and there's the 3. So this case, we're going the opposite way and then straight down, and x equals 4. So that point would be 4, 3. Your x is 4. Your y equals 3. All right, good job. Any questions, let me know. And this will get better and better the more you do them. You need to concentrate on those negatives. Not so much for this one, but the ones that are coming up. Just like the next one. Here we go. And the next one I'm talking about is on the bottom of page 9. And it has an x squared in it. And when we put y equals, let's just start with x squared. There's my x and there's my square. And I graph it. Smiley face. Negative x squared. Oh, let's just move it here. Negative x squared. Frowny face. And anything that's x squared plus 7 or negative x squared subtract 1 are still parabolas. Those are called parabolas. So when you get an x squared in the equation, again, we're always going to have parabolas in grade 10, either facing up or facing down. Okay, so know what you're graphing before you graph it. That's what your graph should look like. We're going to do the negatives because they're the hardest. Okay, so if your graph does not look like a parabola, it's because of these three. You didn't do them correctly. You didn't put the -3 in brackets. So let's do the first one, -3. We're going to sub it into our equation. Wherever we see an x, we're going to put -3. Now, if you put this, you're going to get the wrong answer. And it's not your calculator's fault. Your calculator's right. This would be a -9 subtract 6. If you put it in brackets, you will get the right answer because you get 9 subtract 6. Okay, so it's important you put this -3 in brackets, so your calculator is doing -3 times -3. And this, if you punch it in your calculator, and I guess let's do it on our calculator, is bracket -3, oops, bracket -3, end of bracket, squared, and I think it subtracts 6. And you get 3. Okay, so 3 is the answer. 9 subtract 6 is 3. So that goes here. And we have an ordered pair, -3, 3. Okay, next one, go ahead and I'll give you 80 seconds to do -2. I hardly ever see the positive and zeros wrong, so that's why we're really focusing on the negatives, negative numbers. Okay, so for the -2, you're going to put -2 in brackets. Must put it in brackets. What happens if you don't put it in brackets? -3, I'm just going to do the one that we have the answer for already. X squared subtract 6. Completely different answer. And Harry Potter lightning bolt. So make sure you always put negative signs in brackets. In this case, you're going to 4 subtract 6, which is -2. So your point, -2, -2. I want you to complete the rest of them. Last thing we're doing today. Complete the rest of them, and I want you to graph the points and connect the dots with arrows and label the line. That's not a line. Dum-dum. J-O. It's a parabola. Label the parabola on either end of the arrow. And that's it. Okay, don't worry about all the other questions that follow. Let's just complete this table of values, graph it, and label it, and you're done. If you still have time in class after that, go ahead and work on the rest of your homework or anything else you need to do. God bless. Have an awesome day. Ha ha ha.